My name is Javari Jefferson. I'm a senior at Georgia State University, and recently, my dad took me on the trip of a lifetime. When I first got off the plane, what I really realized and noticed first was the thick, heavy atmosphere. The smell of the air had like a pungent like must. Not that it was unbearable, but I could smell the difference. And unfortunately, that's because of air pollution. Cameroon has a really bad littering problem. So, think of plastic bags, plastic bottles. What a lot of people do, what I noticed when I was there, is a lot of people will just kind of throw their trash anywhere. And, because the country, it doesn't really have the facilities to handle such a big problem like that. So a lot of the trash just ends up burned or in piles in front of neighborhoods and apartments. Um, the pollution in Cameroon, the air pollution is way above the WHO air quality guidelines. Air pollution in Cameroon is the fifth leading factor for premature death. It lands people in the hospital for respiratory diseases, strokes, lung cancer, all types of stuff. I remember my dad, he took me to the market, the biggest market in Cameroon, and what you notice when you see it is just piles and piles and piles of trash.
So the government decided that they can control one section of the town. Like Bonanjo, there's another area called Bali where they can limit the population to come and invade the area so they can keep it cleaner and more secure, and the business can be flourishing in this area.
This is what people have to deal with every single day. They're at risk by just trying to breathe and live, their everyday lives. Coming from America, the first thing people noticed about me was how different I looked. My dyed hair, my broad shoulders, they were dead giveaways that I wasn't from Douala. From like the grown men all the way down to the little kids in elementary school, most people's hair is short, aside from like women with braids or whatever, but most people's hair is short. So me walking in the markets, walking in the streets, walking in the neighborhoods, you definitely get stares. And I understand it because, I am, in a way, just a tourist. I met so many aunts, uncles, cousins, family, friends on my trip. It was ridiculous. But it was kind of amazing as well to see this broad variety of new family members I never knew about. But to be honest, it was kind of overwhelming. Imagine a bunch of strangers you've never met come up to you speaking a language you don't understand all the time. But they offered very warm welcomes. No one really made me feel like an outsider outside of like maybe some customs I've never been a part of. Like, for example, we went to a wedding, but I'll tell you that later. My tonton Jacques, when I got off the plane, he told me, Bienvenue au Cameroun, which means welcome to Cameroon. The language barrier, it was immediate. 83% of Cameroon speaks French, while only 17% of Cameroon speaks English. So when I was even talking to my little cousins, for example, they're like 6, 7 years old. They're speaking circles around me in French, while, I'm speaking fluent English and they can't fully understand me. So we really, in our conversations, we're kind of teaching each other our languages, I taught them a little English, they taught me a little more French.
You can speak me English, yeah.
And, the language barrier was just one of those things where you kind of had to get over it because, these are your people and you're going to be with them for like a month and a half. So, get used to it, Every day was French class. One day, my dad took me personally around Douala to see the city and the sights. My dad showed me his old school, the town square. We were next to the stadium, Mbappe Stadium. It was really interesting to see these places because I was able to infer things about my dad that I never really thought of before, and allowed me to see him in a different light.
This whole area is called Bonanjo. The administrative area of town, where you see the government, the police, the army, and the main businesses. You can see the difference between this area and the rest of the town, where this area is clean, is secure, doesn't have any motor taxi, and then there's no trash around town because they keep this area very well kept. So you see up there, we are going to see my elementary school. So that's the St. Paul Cathedral. That's part of the elementary school. So this is where I did my elementary school. Third grade was up there. My first and second grade, my first grade was in the lower building. My second grade was in the top, the first floor. And then my fourth grade was downstairs. So there are some classes down the hill.
Like I mentioned before, we went to a wedding in Kribi Beach. Kribi is about 3 hours away from Douala. So on the road there, I saw a lot of people selling little knickknacks, snacks, beverages, you know, all out in the hot sun. Unfortunately, of the multitude of the people selling these things, there were children. These children are known as hawkers. During summer vacation here in America, you know, when you're like 7, 8 years old, you can't do too much. You can go on a trip, go to camp, or just try to rest throughout your vacation, play some video games or something. But because of the immense poverty in rural areas like Kribi, that's not really an option. They have to sell these little beverages and snacks and stuff to provide income for their family. The population of Cameroon continues to rise while the economic growth is stunted. So this obviously leads to more and more poverty. In fact, 23% of Cameroon is living under the poverty line. That's $2.15 USD per person per day. My family, for example, there's lots of little kids, lots of mouths to feed, so you can imagine how hard that might be. 8 million people in Cameroon are affected by this poverty, especially in rural areas like Kribi. You know, although times can be tough here in the States, you know, people living paycheck to paycheck, I personally have never had to go out and sell things on the street just to provide for my family during my summer vacation. You know, and it can be dangerous. There's bandits on the borders of the country, so you never know what can happen. This is life and death. My dad was one of the lucky ones. He didn't have to wait countless hours in the hot sun watching cars pass by. In fact, he told me he used to sell sandwiches with his grandmother in her shop. Being here in Cameroon and watching people struggle just to put food on the table, it sparked a question in me. How did he make it to greener pastures? During the wedding in Kribi Beach was when my dad's position seemingly changed. Unlike in America, weddings in Kribi are done a little different. In the States, you have the bride and the groom, they give their vows, they dance, they eat, party, you know, stuff like that. But in Kribi, 2 heads of the family give speeches surrounded by the 2 congregations of the families. In between them on the ground is a bunch of like alcohol and rice, different foods, which I'm thinking is like gifts for, I guess, the newlyweds. It still is a little bit of a blur. But then I noticed, there he was, Victor Kong King, floating around with all types of authority and urgency. For whatever reason, he was treated like the bride and the groom. I left Cameroon with a lot of answered questions about my dad, about our people, where we come from, but a lot of the questions I had still eluded me. I mean, of course they did. I don't speak French. I don't understand all the customs. In a way, I'm still sort of an outsider. But even though I still am technically an outsider, I do find a quiet peace and serenity in knowing I won't understand it all. Coming from a place like Cameroon, I can see why my dad is so hardworking. Also why he's so cheap. To provide for a family that stretches across 2 continents, you have to at least be determined, at least be focused. Focused on keeping your family afloat. Especially when growing up, you had little to anything to your name.